So now I want to turn to Angelo Codevilla's The Lost Decade. This essay was written in the Claremont Review of Books. It was written for full effect, it was written by my mentor, a man named Angelo Codevilla, who I'd met at Boston University when I was working on my PhD studies in 1995. So I'm very well acquainted with his argument and very much in favor of the argument that he provides in this essay. Basically, you know from the title of the essay that he believes that the years 2000 to 2010 amounted to a lost decade for America. And the question is, when you read through the essay, why is that the case? So the first thing that we have to deal with, right, is that horrific event that occurs at the beginning of the decade, right? This attack on the United States by these terrorists, September 11th of 2001. And then what follows is our reaction to that terrorist attack. So the first thing we do is we say, well, why do they hate us? What do they find wrong with us? And here we could have turned to the words of Samuel Huntington, right? They hate us for civilizational reasons. They hate us because we represent a different notion of how men ought to live, a different notion of to what degree liberty ought to be granted to mankind. To a different understanding as to why economics should work the way they do, et cetera, et cetera. But what we don't grasp at this time is something that Codevilla argues that we have to grasp in every time, and that is the following. At the beginning of this essay, he says that every statesman owes the following to the people he leads: a clear conception of what is the best life. So the statesman has to understand, why is it that we do what we do? Why is it that we believe what we do? And why is it that all of these things lead us to want a peace the way that we do? And our peace is good to the degree that it allows us to live the way of life that we want. And our peace is bad to the degree that it undercuts the way of life that we want. So every statesman must keep in mind peace, but a peace that is worthy our definition of what the best life is. So you'd ask yourself, well, what's peace ordinarily meant in the American civilizational or cultural experience? It's meant us living, right, in a way where we are born into this world with rights. We get to choose how we want to live, by and large. We get to acquire property. We get to enjoy the flourishing that comes through our hard work, our efforts, etc. We are members of communities that tend to rule over themselves. We don't have power taken away from us willy-nilly. The best defender of our lives actually is ourselves. The best defenders of our family actually are ourselves. So government, Codevilla argues, within the American political setting, had for a long time understood its proper role, right? It serves us best by leaving us alone. And then you deal with the terrorist attack on New York City and other locations, 2001. What does the American statesman owe the country? Nothing more than this. And this is going to sound brutal, but Codevilla wants it to sound brutal. What the American statesman owes Americans after September 11th, 2001 is merely this: we must kill the individuals responsible for the heinous act upon the American regime. What they committed was a crime against our way of life. And the only thing warranted in that situation, when another declares war upon you, is if you have the power to defeat it with all of your might. What you ought not to do is try to do anything more than that. What you ought not to do is lose sight of the goal. The goal is victory, and the classical conception of victory means killing that person who wants to undermine your way of life. But what do we do instead in the 2000s? We wage a war against terror. We try to build nations, democratic nations abroad. We take on challenges that have nothing to do with the events of 9/11. But most awfully, Codevilla argues, we create within the United States a homeland state and homeland security that does what? That checks us against ourselves. that has a notion that perhaps we are the danger to ourselves. So you think of how all of the policies regarding federal buildings changed in the 2000s. All of the policies regarding transportation changed in the 2000s. So we create a variety of different bureaucratic layers in American society that totally upset the American way of life, that put American citizens on the defensive rather than enabling American citizens to be on the offensive, noting that we have this thing called the United States of America because of our citizens. So the best way to entrust the best for our citizenry is to entrust our citizenry. And that's exactly what we don't do. So this very, very poignant part of this essay where he says the following. This is really kind of symbolizes everything that he's trying to suggest to us in this essay. The most heroic and American act on September 11th, 2001, most heroic act was performed by Americans saving Americans. But that act, in bringing that last plane down and in combating the terrorists on that plane, would have been viewed by federal transportation law as unlawful. Think about that. You hear that expression, if you see something, say something. Codevilla would say, there's not a more un-American statement than that. If you see something, do something. That change in regime, that change in orientation has actually meant that the terrorists have done much more than horribly destroy buildings and lives in 2001. They've gone further than that to the degree they defined American life since then. And it's that American life that we need to retain if we truly are to live in an American flourishing experience.